can see how many lives Charlie as well as Rose have touched throughout their lives. But the baby's name wasn't Charlie. It was Christ. Christ Geddes was Charles' name, but he unpretentiously was known to us and by everyone as Charlie. He passed away at 93 years of age. What a monument. And he came from a big family. Charlie is predeceased by his father Chris and his mother Florence, his brothers Harry and Alex, his sister Alice, and his dear wife Rose. And he's survived by his brother Nicholas, sisters Nora, Artemis, and Helen, as well as his dear only son, Steve, and his dear wife Sue, and their 3 grandchildren, Kendra, Amanda, Hillary, and 2 great-grandchildren, Madison and Jacoby. And he survived by hundreds and hundreds of friends who consider him grandparents like a father, right? And good friends. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 has a beautiful description of something that Charlie built for himself. In Ecclesiastes 7:1, it says there, a good name, and in particular a good name with God, is better than good oil. At that time, oil was a precious commodity, small amounts equaling a year's wage. So a good name was better than that. And the day of death is better than the day of birth. Why is that? Well, when Charlie was born, all he had was his name, right? He hadn't made a name yet. He hadn't made a good name yet. He just was given a name. Now, when you say the name Charlie Geddes, what is attached to it? Just a list of good qualities that we remember about him. So Charlie made a good name with God and with his friends. What are some of the things that made that name that we remember? Well, his family remember him as a little boy. And most of us don't remember him as a little boy. But his family would remember a little boy who liked to sketch and a young man who liked to sketch. We saw some of them in the pictures. Write poetry, play the piano, and he always had a good sense of humor. Loved to laugh. And he loved clean humor. And he liked to share it with others as well. Most everyone here now knows that Charlie loved the weather. He didn't like the bad effects that it brought sometimes, but he would be so excited to watch the hurricane that was hitting the coast of Texas. He just loves weather, always liked to talk about it, especially nor'easters. And he'd always tell us the barometric pressure, what the high winds was, the snow depth. He would always talk about it, even to complete strangers. And how we will miss Charlie telling us and complete strangers how many weeks there are till spring. I've heard that my whole life. He told me how many weeks till spring. Always. And what a good thing to hear in February, to hear someone tell you how many weeks there are till spring. Now, all the groups that knew Charlie, either his family who grew up with him, his neighbors on Bow Street, and his friends that are here in the Kingdom Hall, we remember him as a naturally shy man, soft-spoken. How many times did Charlie talk to you like this and say something to you with his mouth half covered as if to, make his voice a little louder? We knew him that way. But how did this shy, soft-spoken man deal with that throughout his life? He worked at it. He worked at overcoming his shyness. How did he do it? Well, he would embarrass Steve and Sue sometimes in Market Basket by trying to get into conversations with people. To overcome his shyness, how would he do it? Well, you know how Market Basket can be so crowded, the lines are so huge. Well, Charlie would say either to the person behind him or the person in front of them, boy, they need a traffic cop in here. And that would get people to smile. And then it would break the ice and he would start a conversation, despite the fact that he was shy and soft-spoken. So he worked at whatever qualities that he thought he should work at. To say he's optimistic was an understatement. He always, not only telling you how many weeks till spring, but he always has something positive to say, especially with those who are going through hard times. You know, it's hard to say the name Charlie without saying the name Rose, right? I mean, they were inseparable. One little indication that things would work out well is part of a poem that Charlie wrote that Steve found. And this was to Rose before they were married. He wrote, "Ours is a true love, darling, so let's never part. Come what may, for now we are as one, loving each other within a true, strong, unfailing love. I'm sure a love like ours shall never die." Here we see evidence of a man who was part poet and part prophet, because he was married for 63 years. Yes, his love for his wife never did die. And we appreciate that name that Charlie made for us as families, to see a good, loving husband. What a good example for us. When you think of Charlie and Rose, I was thinking about the obituary picture of Charlie and Rose in Salem News. How many people do you think saw that picture without knowing them and said, "I think I saw them in Salem Willows"? Right? Because that's where they always were. Just about every time my wife and I went to the Willows after we were married, I saw Charlie and Rose. You know, and everyone saw them. But what does that tell you? They did things together as a married couple. Charlie didn't go out with the boys. He stayed with his dear wife. What a good name he made in that way, and a good example for us. You know, Charlie appreciated Jesus Christ and his teachings, and Jesus taught in Matthew 6 to keep your life simple, right? Well, Charlie typified a person who kept a simple life, living in the same house almost 93 years. And all 63 years of his marriage was in that one house. And I think the house was built for him, because you can touch the ceiling with your hands. I think the builder took his height and said, "Okay, let's make it 2 feet higher," or something. And that's how it was. But it fit him perfect when you walked in that house. But now, in the late 1940s, shortly after Steve was born, Charlie was in his mid-20s. He was working at GE, and he worked with a co-worker who was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this man started talking to Charlie, answering questions that Charlie had using the Bible. And Charlie liked that. When the man showed Charlie that God had a personal name, Jehovah, in Psalm 83:18 in the King James Bible, Charlie couldn't believe it. He had never seen that before. It made an impression on him. So in a short time, Charlie and Rose started studying the Bible with this man and his wife. And in March of 1950, he was baptized. He was baptized with Brother Dupuy right down here too. So 67 years that he was a servant of Jehovah, known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And despite being shy and soft-spoken, he was bold. He was a bold preacher of the good news. He wanted to share with other people what he learned. He didn't want to keep it to himself. So, like Jehovah's Witnesses, he went door to door. And I dare say he probably knocked on every door in the city of Peabody, as well as others around him. But notice this experience to show just how bold Charlie was when it came to sharing his faith with others. Brother Leger sent this to me, and then I remembered I've heard this before. Charlie told me this story. But think about this. It tells you something about how bold Charlie was, but also how kind and forgiving he was at the same time. It says Charlie was in the ministry with a group of others, and while they were walking, he stopped to make a kind remark to a father and a daughter. He said to the daughter, "What a cute dress you have." Charlie said this in a complimentary tone. The next moment, Charlie's feet were off the ground as the father grabbed him by the front of his collar and raised him into the air. The man screamed at him, "I went to war for that girl," he barked in a confrontational tone. "Do you know what I'm going to do to you?" he asked angrily. Charlie said, "I don't know, what?" The next thing he knew, Charlie was picking himself up off the ground, only to be hoisted into the air and thrown down a second time. What did Charlie do? He ran. He ran down the street. He had good sense. He didn't want to be thrown down a third time. So a concerned person was driving down the street, sees the violent encounter, and pulls over the car and says, "Charlie," didn't know his name, but, "do you want to get in, sir?" And Charlie declined, thinking that the person was an accomplice to the bully. So he ran up to the front steps of a nearby house and knocked on the door. Guess what the response was? "Oh, you people again." The woman of the house chided as Charlie begged to use her phone. This kind of a big woman picked Charlie up and dangled him over the side of the porch, threatening to let him drop. Then the father, who had just thrown him to the ground, comes up the front steps hoping to give Charlie another licking, when suddenly a voice bellowed from behind, "You there!" The voice of the police officer stopped the father cold. The officer loaded the father into the back of the cruiser and told Charlie to sit in the front. The three drove to the police station. The father disappeared into the office of the chief, who was scolding him. "You can't do that. Those people have a right to do that work." The chief's office door opened, and the two appeared before Charlie. The chief asked, "What would you like to do with him?" Charlie replied, "Let him go home." Aghast, the chief exclaimed, "I've never seen such charity. Don't you want to have him arrested?" Charlie went on to excuse the actions of the father. He said, "This man was drunk, and he has a family to provide for. Let him go home." The chief ordered the father to shake hands with Charlie. The man complied, but never looked Charlie in the face out of shame for what he had done. Was that the last time Charlie Jettis preached in the city of Peabody? No, that was the beginning of his preaching career, and he never, ever stopped. So don't let that small person of stature, shy, soft-spoken, describe the kind of person he was inside. He was a fearless servant of Jehovah and preacher, and a good example for us. Another thing that Charlie did, which was a good example for us, was the way he shared his faith with others. He was no preacher on a soapbox or trying to jam things down people's throat, was he? That's not the way he was trained, and that's not the way he carried his ministry out. And a good example of that is in this next experience. Jehovah's Witnesses are known around the globe to be peaceful people. We don't take part in warfare, no matter what country we live in. But how would Charlie study with a man that was an active duty officer in the military? What would he do? Would he tell this man, "You have to quit"? Would he say, I'm not going to study with you"? Listen, I'll let Walter Jaworski tell you the story. Walter says he met Charlie in 1974. His wife was having a Bible study with Jehovah's Witnesses, and he was listening in, and he liked what he was hearing, and he wanted to hear more. So he asked to sit on the study. This is how he describes Charlie. He says, "Charlie was one of the most humble and mild men I'd ever met. He never gave me his own opinion, but always answered my questions from God's Word. Charlie never questioned me about being in the military, and he gave me the time to see how Jehovah felt about my situation as I continued to study. Charlie and Rose became like our parents, as my wife and I were not from the area. They included us in get-togethers, bowling, even helping work at the remodeling of our old Kingdom Hall on Tremont Street. He says, I can remember at times going to the Kingdom Hall in my uniform. Nobody questioned this, but they were all friendly and loving." He said he was transferred to Miami, Florida in June of 1976, and he immediately started to attend the meetings at the Kingdom Hall. And then in November of 1977, he resigned his commission as a conscientious objector. He was baptized in December of 1977. He says, "It was easy to see to me that Jehovah always knows what we need and when we need it. He knew that Charlie was the type of man that would allow me to see for myself what I needed to do. Charlie helped me to gain a firm foundation based on knowledge of the Bible and growth in my love for Jehovah. I will always remember his patience, kindness, and his unswerving love for Jehovah God." What an excellent example of someone sharing what he knows from the Bible with others and let them make the decision as to what they would like to do. And Charlie remained friends with the Jaworskis throughout his whole life. Every year he would go to Florida and stay with them for vacation. So Mr. Jaworski became not only a Bible student, but his friend. He viewed Charlie like a dad. But you know, Mr. Jaworski said that Charlie had unswerving love for God, and that lasted for 67 years. How is that possible? Think of how many funerals Charlie went to in 93 years, how many wakes he went to, how many bad things he saw in 93 years, yet he still had unswerving love for God. Whereas sometimes when people go through tragedy, They blame God for things that they go through. But that never happened to Charlie. Why is that? Well, there's a beautiful scripture that Charlie would share with others that helped him never to blame God for the bad, including the death of his family members and friends that he saw. That's in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. And this is something Charlie learned that really helped him. It says there, that is why just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin. And so death spread to all men because they had sinned. So Charlie saw from this and other scriptures that God wasn't to blame for death. We die because of Adam's sin, his disobedience to the command that was given him in the Garden of Eden. So he never blamed God for the death of his siblings and all the families that he had known throughout the years. And this buoyed him. And he shared that with as many people as he could. But was Charlie afraid to go to sleep in death? Well, the answer is no. Why is that? Well, take a look at Psalm 146. Psalm 146 in verse 4. The Bible beautifully describes the condition of those who have fallen asleep in death, and this helped Charlie to cope with the death of his wife as well as his family and friends. In Psalm 146, notice verse 4. It says, his breath goes out. He returns to the ground. On that very day, his thoughts perish. So Charlie appreciated that those who have fallen asleep in death are at rest. No more thinking, no more work, no more stress. Jesus Christ described people that had died as sleeping. What a beautiful way to describe someone that we have lost in death. There's nothing worse than not knowing where someone is, right? For instance, if you went to the Devereaux house on the last days or weeks of Charlie's death, before he died, if you went to there and you said to one of the aides, where's Mr. Jettis? He's not in his room. And they said, we don't know. We don't know where he is. Would you say to yourself, okay, I'll come back tomorrow, maybe you'll find him and I'll visit him? No, you'd be sick to your stomach because you didn't know where he was. But now, let's turn back the clock. You walk into the Devereaux house, you say, where's Mr. Jettis' room? They point to that room. You walk over the room and you look inside, Charlie's sleeping. You walk over, you can see his chest go up and down. He's sleeping. How do you feel? Well, you're disappointed that you can't have a visit, but you know where he is. He's not in any pain. He's not anxious. He's not suffering in any way. He's sleeping. And when you see him again and he wakes up, you'll have your visit. Well, isn't it loving that after Adam and Eve sinned, and like Romans said, brought death to the human family, God lovingly put in the Bible what people are doing when they're dead. They're sleeping. They're at rest. We don't have to worry about them anymore. Don't have to be anxious about them. And they're sleeping until when? Well, would it make sense that God would say they're sleeping forever in eternity and never waking up? No, that's contrary to his original purpose for having man live on the earth. That wouldn't bring us comfort to know that our loved one is asleep forever, would it? Let's take a look at a beautiful hope that Charlie had in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 22. This again is one of the reasons why Charlie could just really be such a faithful man, loving God throughout his whole life, because of this beautiful promise. And notice the words that he used here when referring to those who are dead. In 1 Corinthians 15, 20 and 22, it says, but now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep in death. So we know that Jesus Christ was raised to the heavens after he was asleep in death for 3 days. And then it goes on to say, for since death came through a man, see, not God, but death came through a man, Adam, resurrection of the dead also comes through a man. For just as in Adam all are dying, so also in the Christ all will be made alive. This hope is an anchor that helps Charlie to know that he would see his mother, his father, his siblings, and all his friends, including his wife, again in the future. John chapter 5 emphasizes this a bit more. John chapter 5. And the idea of somebody being resurrected sounds outlandish, doesn't it? And Jesus Christ knew that. He had resurrected people. But notice the words he used here in John chapter 5, verse 25 and 28. He says, "Most truly I say to you, the hour is coming when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who have paid attention will live." Then in verse 28, "Don't be amazed at this, for the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs or the graves will hear his voice and come out." That's the hope that Charlie had for his family and himself, knowing that his rest would be temporary in the grave. One final scripture on the resurrection is in Revelation chapter 21. And notice the words that are used here, which help us to appreciate that these are things that will happen on the earth. Revelation 21:4 says, "And he, that is God, will wipe out every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more." Well, ask yourself, are there tears in heaven? No. Is there death in heaven? No. So we're talking about what's going to happen on the earth. So there won't be any more tears, no more death, neither will mourning like we're doing now, nor outcry, nor pain be any more. The former things have passed away. What a beautiful hope Charlie had, and he tried to share with as many people as he could. That not only was death not part of God's purpose, the dead would be sleeping until they were resurrected, and God would fulfill his original purpose for the earth. What a wonderful hope Charlie, as well as we, have for our future. But how can we benefit from being in a place like this today? To be at a memorial service for a man like Charlie Geddes. Well, we read earlier in Ecclesiastes chapter 7 that we want to try to make a good name for ourselves. And we want to make a good name with God. And the book of Ecclesiastes goes on to say that it's better to be at the house of mourning than at the house of rejoicing. Because when you're at a wedding feast or a house of rejoicing, you're not thinking seriously, you're having a good time, you're having fun. But a place like this, you can think about yourself. And what kind of name am I making with God or those around me, right? It brings us to have this kind of reflections. And when we think of a man like Charlie, we're not going to copy anybody, but we think of his good points. And we try to apply those to ourselves because they really endear us to other people. There's one final scripture that really describes Charlie well. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58. And he'll be happy to know when he's resurrected that we said this about him. It says there, "Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always having plenty to do in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in connection with the Lord." Yes, our labor isn't in vain. Charlie's efforts, Charlie's simple life, his efforts to help others is not in vain. He'll never receive a check for it. Nobody will receive a check for it. But he's built up a treasure in the heavens. He's made a good name with God. And that is something that will never be forgotten by us or by our Father. You know, Charlie's disposition, the way he conducted himself, it really brought out the best in people. And Steve, the Geddes family, wanted me to acknowledge the different people that have helped Charlie, especially in the last days of his life. He had so many aides that would come and help out when Charlie and Steve were working. Steve and Sue were working and help out in the house and help with care and things like that. And I don't know if we all know this. If you're a nice person, you usually get better treatment than if you're not a nice person, right? When someone's getting paid to take care of you, they're gonna do it. But if you're nice, they're gonna be nicer to you, right? Charlie got good care. Why? Because he was nice. He was loving. He was respectful. He was kind to people. People that took care of him went out of their way to show him affection and expressions of kindness because of the man that he was. Jay, for instance, one of his aides, would kiss his forehead whenever he left him for the day. Do you think that would have happened if Charlie wasn't a nice man? No, it wouldn't, because Jay didn't have to do that. Agim said, he was one of his, those who cared for him. Agim said he couldn't take care of his father in Albania, who was Charlie's age, but he could take care of Charlie. And he took care of him like he was his own father. Why? Because of the way Charlie treated people, the respect that he showed others. And a number of Charlie's spiritual brothers and sisters also consistently provided comfort to him, even though they were decades younger than him. One in particular, Eric Legier. Eric Legier is 33 years old. Took Charlie places, took him to visit others in nursing homes where Charlie would encourage other people. Took him on social things, not because he was paid, because he was his friend. Charlie's 93, Eric's 33. Charlie considered Eric as one of his best friends at 33 years old. What a beautiful testimony that is. And we also want to acknowledge Sue as not a daughter-in-law, but a daughter to Charlie. You did such a good job taking care of Rose and Charlie and all the stress that is involved in living with somebody and dealing with them getting older. You really championed it, and you'll always be a good example to us that we can use. Remember what a good job that they did with taking care of their parents? We can encourage others by the good example that you, Sue, as well as you, Steve, set for us in taking care of your parents. And we really love you for that, and we appreciate that. You know, I asked Steve on Wednesday when we had a little chat, I said, was there anything that you wanted me to say about your dad? And he had so much in his mind, and he just met with me, and we were watching the videos, and he said, no, I think everything's there. Then that night, he sent me an email. He said, these are some things that I'd like to thank my dad for, or say that I've learned from my father, in no particular order, but these are things that came to his mind that he learned from his dad and that we can appreciate. Don't say no too quickly. Don't try to be the loudest person in the room. Laugh, but not at others' expense. Appreciate your family. Remember, a walk at Salem Willows with someone you love is better than a walk at a fancy Caribbean beach with someone you don't. Learn from the Bible, and then practice what you preach. Let other people give you compliments. Live under your income, and be content with a small house. Be patient with people who can't spell Jettis. It starts with a T, for those of you who don't know. Learn how to make your wife smile often. Get outdoors at least once a day. Work at overcoming your shyness. And above all, be ready to tell strangers how many weeks there are until spring. We appreciate those thoughts, Steve. Thank you very much. You know, friends, it was so encouraging to hear all the conversation taking place before the meeting, before this memorial service, as well as afterwards, looking at the pictures. And you know, Charlie loved ice cream. So if you think of Charlie and his life as the biggest ice cream that Hobbs can make down at the Willows, all we got today was one lick. That's all we got. So in your conversation, talk about Charlie. Find ways that you can imitate his good example, and we appreciate his faithful example and the beautiful pictures that Pete will run again after our talk today. Well, we're going to conclude by standing and singing together Song 151. It will be on the monitors for you to see. And then longtime friend Gene Sangster will close with prayer.